You know, when you hear the word ransomware, you probably picture some malicious code, right? Maybe a skull and crossbones on a locked computer screen. But honestly, that's just a tiny piece of the puzzle. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at ransomware not just as software, but as what it really is, a full-blown, highly structured, and frankly, a terrifyingly profitable global industry.
And just to get a sense of the scale we're talking about, look at this number. In 2021, just one single ransomware group, a group called Conti, is estimated to have raked in $2.7 billion in revenue. Yeah, that's billion with a B. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire annual GDP of some small countries. It's just staggering.
So, that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth does an illegal operation get to that level of, for lack of a better word, corporate success? For a long time, we could really only guess. But then, in 2022, something totally unprecedented happened. A massive leak of their internal chat logs gave us this golden ticket, a chance to see exactly how these digital corporations are run from the inside out.
Okay, so first things first. To really wrap our heads around how a group like Conti can get so massive, we need to zoom out and look at the whole market they're playing in. This isn't just about one crew of hackers. It's a booming global economy built entirely on digital extortion. Now this slide. This tells a really critical story about where this whole thing is headed. You see that payments hit over $820 million in 2023. But the truly alarming part? Look at the surge in claimed attacks, up 50% in just 1 year. So what does that tell us? It suggests that even if law enforcement is making it a little harder to get those huge payouts, the attackers are just compensating by hitting way more targets than ever before. This problem isn't just growing, it's accelerating, fast.
All right, so we've seen the scale of the market. But what does one of these billion-dollar criminal businesses actually look like on the inside? Well, thanks to that leak I mentioned, we get to step inside the virtual walls of Conti, one of the most successful and notorious ransomware firms in history.
So, this leak was huge. We're talking about over 160,000 internal messages. All of a sudden, researchers had this absolute treasure trove, a direct, unfiltered look into the daily operations, the arguments, the strategies, and even the corporate culture of a top-tier cybercrime syndicate.
So what were they actually talking about all day? Well, a machine learning analysis of all those chats boiled it down to 5 main topics. The first 3 are pretty much what you'd expect, right? Business, technical projects, malware development. No surprises there. But then you look at the last 2, management and internal tasks, and customer service. Yeah, customer service. This is where things start to look less like a hacker crew and a lot more like some kind of twisted tech startup.
And this chart just illustrates that point perfectly. It breaks down the conversation topics for everyone in the group. The blue part, that's the technical talk. But the pink and green, that's all business and management. Just look at how much of their time was spent on non-technical stuff. On average, almost half, about 44% of their discussions were about running the business, not just writing code.
This is just fascinating. Researchers were actually able to map out corporate-style roles based on what people talked about. The big boss and the head of office operations, they talked about business almost 99% of the time. The coders, well, they talked tech. But get this, a role they identified as being like a chief operating officer, a COO, their main focus was customer service. It's wild. They had an org chart, they had departments, just like any legitimate company. And this is so important because it shows these aren't just rogue hackers. They're organized businesses, which makes them more predictable and maybe, just maybe, more vulnerable to new ways of taking them down.
But here's the kicker. Despite having all these specialized roles, the vast majority of Conti's staff, a whopping 96% of them, were what researchers called all-rounders. They were involved in everything from tech to management to customer support. It suggests this was a really dynamic, cross-functional organization, kind of like a startup, that required skills far beyond just being a good hacker.
Okay, so now that we've seen how they're organized like a company, let's talk about their business model. Because how they make their money has evolved into something way more sophisticated and, honestly, way more damaging. The real game changer here is something called Ransomware as a Service, or RAS. Think of it like a franchise. The main group, like Conti, they're the ones who develop the malware and run the back-end infrastructure. Then they license it out to other criminals, who they call affiliates. These affiliates go out and do the actual attacks, and then they split the ransom profits with the developers. It's a criminal franchise model that lets them scale their operations on a global level. And the attacks themselves have changed too. It's not just about locking your files anymore. The modern playbook is a four-step process they call double extortion. It starts with getting in, sure, but the really crucial next step is stealing your most sensitive data before they lock a single thing. This gives them a second, incredibly powerful point of leverage against you.
So let's just trace the path here. It often kicks off with something simple, like a phishing email. But once they're inside your network, they don't just smash and grab. No, they move silently, escalating their privileges, hunting for your crown jewels, the most valuable data you have. They quietly pull all that data out, they exfiltrate it, and only then do they deploy the ransomware and lock everything down. Now you're totally trapped. They have your files held hostage, and they have all your secrets.
And this, of course, brings us to the impossible choice that every single victim faces. Your operations are paralyzed, your data is encrypted, and there's a threat of a massive public leak hanging over your head. What do you do?
Let's be clear, there are no good options here. It's a brutal calculation. On one side, paying might be the fastest way to get your data back, to avoid that public data leak, and to prevent just catastrophic damage to your operations and reputation. But on the other side, there's absolutely no guarantee the criminals will even honor the deal. Plus, paying literally funds their entire industry, it marks you as a willing target for future attacks, and it could even be illegal under certain government sanctions. It's a lose-lose situation.
And we see this exact dilemma play out in the real world with huge corporations. JBS Foods and Colonial Pipeline, they both paid multi-million-dollar ransoms to get critical infrastructure back online. But then you have companies like Puma and the chip giant NVIDIA, who chose not to pay and instead just had to accept the consequences of their data being stolen and potentially leaked. Every single choice carries an enormous risk.
So with the stakes this incredibly high, how is the world fighting back? Well, the strategy is finally evolving. We're moving from a defensive crouch into a much more proactive offense.
Law enforcement agencies are realizing they just can't play whack-a-mole anymore. These gangs just rebrand and pop right back up. So the new focus is on dismantling the core infrastructure, what they call the enablement layer, that all these criminals depend on. We're talking about the bulletproof hosting services, the anonymizing proxies, the malware distribution networks, the whole foundation of their business.
And you know what? We're actually seeing some major successes. Operation Endgame was this massive, coordinated international effort that took down key malware services. Governments are putting sanctions on those shady hosting providers that knowingly cater to criminals. And you even have private tech companies actively taking down the huge proxy networks that both ransomware gangs and even state-sponsored actors use to hide their tracks.
But make no mistake, this is a constant cat-and-mouse game. As our defenses get better and as more victims find the courage to refuse to pay, the attackers are just getting more vicious. They're escalating their pressure tactics beyond just calling the IT department. Now they're contacting individual employees, customers, business partners, anyone they can to try and publicly shame the victim company into paying up. It's a whole new level of psychological warfare.
Which really leaves us with this one final nagging thought. For years, the standard advice has always been the same. Just have good backups. But in a world where attackers are stealing all of your sensitive data first, where they're threatening to leak your trade secrets, your customer lists, and your private employee information to the entire world, is a simple backup really enough to protect you anymore?